what is the right thing to do? This age-old question lies at the heart of justice. What's the right thing to do? A groundbreaking book by Harvard professor Michael Sandel, one of today's most influential political philosophers. Sandel rose to prominence not just through academic writing, but through the lecture halls of Harvard University, where his justice course became one of the most popular in the school's history. Tens of thousands of students enrolled over the years, and when it was made freely available online and on public television, it reached millions more around the world. Why the buzz around a philosophy class? Because Sandel makes moral and political philosophy come alive. Instead of abstract theories detached from real life, he brings them into conversation with today's most pressing ethical dilemmas: war and peace, income inequality, affirmative action, same-sex marriage, and more. His teaching style is distinctive. It's not about giving answers, but about asking hard questions, often putting his students on the spot in a Socratic dialogue that pushes them to defend their moral intuitions, challenge their assumptions, and reason publicly with others. Justice, What's the Right Thing to Do? Was born from this classroom experience. The book is an attempt to take that conversation beyond Harvard, to invite a wider audience into the world of moral reasoning. It doesn't assume any background in philosophy. Instead, it walks readers through some of the most influential moral theories: Utilitarianism, Libertarianism, Kantian ethics, Rawlsian justice, and Aristotle's concept of virtue, using vivid examples from everyday life. But Sandel's ultimate aim is not to champion one theory over another. It's to show that moral philosophy matters, not just in textbooks, but in how we vote, how we spend, how we treat others, and how we live. In a time when politics often feels shallow or polarized, Sandel's message is both simple and profound. To be a citizen in a democracy is to engage in moral argument, and asking what justice means is the first step toward thinking more deeply and more responsibly about the world we share. What is the right thing to do? A utilitarian might say, do whatever brings the most happiness to the most people. This is the core idea of utilitarianism, a theory developed by philosophers like Jeremy Bentham and later refined by John Stuart Mill. At its heart is a deceptively simple principle: maximize utility, that is, promote the greatest good for the greatest number. Morality in this view becomes a kind of math. Add up the benefits, subtract the harms, and choose the option that produces the highest net happiness. But how does this work in practice? Michael Sandel introduces us to one of the most famous thought experiments in moral philosophy, the trolley problem. Imagine a runaway trolley headed toward 5 unsuspecting workers. You can pull a lever to divert it onto another track, where it would kill just one person. Do you pull the lever? From a utilitarian perspective, the answer is clear. Save 5 lives, even at the cost of 1. The numbers tell the story. 5 is greater than 1. End of discussion. But is that really the right thing to do? Sandel pushes us to explore the limits of this logic. What if you're not pulling a lever, but pushing a person off a bridge to stop the trolley? The numbers are the same, but our moral intuitions shift. Something about using a person as a means to an end feels wrong. This is where utilitarianism runs into trouble. First, it risks violating individual rights. If maximizing happiness means sacrificing the innocent, is that acceptable? Most people would say no. Yet strict utilitarianism struggles to explain why. Second, it ignores how happiness is distributed. Suppose a policy brings great joy to many but imposes serious suffering on a few. Does that still count as just? What about fairness? What about dignity? These questions reveal why utilitarianism, while powerful, is also incomplete. It teaches us to weigh costs and benefits, something every society must do. But Sandel reminds us not everything that can be counted counts, and not everything that counts can be counted. Utilitarianism forces us to think clearly about consequences, but justice, as we'll see, requires more than numbers. It demands a deeper conversation about rights, respect, and the moral limits of calculation. What if justice isn't about maximizing welfare, but about maximizing freedom? This is the core idea of libertarianism. According to this view, justice means respecting each person's right to self-ownership, their life, their liberty, and their property. The role of government then should be minimal, protecting contracts, punishing force or fraud, and otherwise staying out of the way. As Michael Sandel explains, libertarians believe that using someone, whether through taxation, conscription, or regulation, without their free consent, violates their basic rights. You don't owe anything to others simply by virtue of being part of a community. If you didn't choose to help, you shouldn't be forced to. But how far does this principle go? Sandel invites us to test it with real-world dilemmas. Take, for instance, the kidney market. If you own your body, shouldn't you be allowed to sell a kidney to someone who needs it? After all, it's your property and theirs is a willing purchase. Shouldn't consent be enough? Or consider taxation. If you work hard and earn money, libertarians argue redistributing that money through taxes for someone else's benefit is akin to forced labor. As one libertarian philosopher, Robert Nozick, famously put it, taxation of earnings is on a par with forced labor. Sandel doesn't just present the logic, he challenges it. What about the poor person who sells a kidney out of desperation? Is their choice truly free or shaped by inequality? And what happens to solidarity, to public goods, to our sense of mutual responsibility, when justice becomes only about what's mine is mine? The libertarian ideal of freedom is powerful, but also, Sandel suggests, incomplete. It risks treating people as isolated individuals, ignoring the web of obligations and dependencies that make community possible. In the end, libertarianism raises some of the hardest questions in political philosophy. Where does my freedom end and our responsibility to each other begin? Not all moral reasoning begins with outcomes. For the philosopher Immanuel Kant, what matters is not what happens, but whether we act from principle. In other words, morality is about doing the right thing for the right reason, out of duty, not desire or consequence. Michael Sandel explores this through Kant's core idea, the categorical imperative. This principle asks us to act only according to maxims we could rationally will as universal laws. If a rule wouldn't make sense if everyone followed it, then it's not morally acceptable for anyone. Take the example of a lying promise. Imagine borrowing money with no intention of paying it back. Could that lie be universalized? No, because if everyone lied when borrowing, trust would collapse. Promises would lose all meaning. So even if lying might help you or even save a life, Kant insists, don't do it. The act is wrong, regardless of the outcome. Kant's ethics emphasize human dignity. We must never use people as mere means to our ends, no matter how noble the cause. Every person is an end in themselves, worthy of respect simply by virtue of being rational and autonomous. But this raises a challenge. What about morally complex situations, like hiding refugees from a regime? Is it really wrong to lie to a soldier at the door? For Kant, yes, because once we make exceptions to moral law, we abandon its universality. Duty, he insists, must hold firm, even when it's hard. Sandel doesn't dismiss Kant's strictness. Instead, he invites us to wrestle with it. Kant pushes us to ask not what will happen, but can I justify this act as a universal principle? In an age obsessed with outcomes and trade-offs, that's a radical demand. Kantian ethics may feel cold or rigid, but for Sandel, they offer something vital, a vision of justice grounded in respect for persons, not in utility or profit. They remind us that morality isn't just about what works, it's about what's right. What would a truly just society look like? John Rawls, one of the most influential political philosophers of the 20th century, believed we could answer that question through a thought experiment, a simple but profound exercise in imagination. Rawls asks us to design the basic rules of society from behind a veil of ignorance. That is, imagine you know nothing about who you'll be. Your gender, race, class, talents, religion. You don't know whether you'll be rich or poor, healthy or sick, advantaged or marginalized. In that original position of radical uncertainty, what principles would you choose? Rawls argues, rational people would choose a system that protects basic liberties for all, freedom of speech, religion, and equal political rights. But beyond that, they'd also adopt what he calls the difference principle. Inequalities are only just if they benefit the least advantaged members of society. In other words, justice is not about making everyone equal, but about ensuring that social and economic inequalities work to the advantage of all, especially those with the fewest resources. Michael Sandel illustrates this idea with a practical example: healthcare allocation. In a Rawlsian society, policies wouldn't favor the well-off just because they can pay. Instead, systems would be judged by how they improve the condition of the most vulnerable. It's a powerful vision of justice, one grounded in fairness, not fortune. We don't deserve our talents or starting points in life. So a just society, Rawls argues, doesn't reward luck, it compensates for it. But not everyone agrees. Critics argue that Rawls's veil of ignorance is too abstract, that it reduces real people to hypothetical choosers without roots, relationships, or values. In focusing on fair procedures, it may overlook the deeper moral ties that bind communities, like loyalty, tradition, or civic responsibility. Sandel acknowledges these tensions. Rawls gives us a compelling method for imagining fairness, but he also opens the door to deeper questions. What do we owe one another? What role should merit play? How do we balance justice with belonging? For Sandel, Rawls doesn't offer the final word, but a crucial one. In an unequal world where accidents of birth shape destinies, Rawls's challenge is clear. Would you accept the rules of society if you didn't know your place in it? That, Sandel reminds us, is one of the most powerful moral tests we can ask. What if justice isn't just about rules or rights, but about cultivating character and building community? In the final chapters of Justice, What's the Right Thing to Do?, Michael Sandel makes a turn toward Aristotle, and with him a broader tradition of virtue ethics that asks not just what is fair, but what kind of people should we be? This is what philosophers call a communitarian perspective. Sandel challenges the notion that justice can be neutral, that we can separate law from morality or fairness from values. In real life, he argues, justice is always entangled with our conceptions of the good life. Take the example of patriotism and civic duty. Should citizens be required to serve in the military? Must we all stand for the flag? Can a community demand sacrifice in the name of solidarity? These are not questions that can be settled by individual rights alone. They ask us to consider our responsibilities to one another, not just as strangers with equal claims, but as members of a shared political project. They invoke virtues like loyalty, courage, and public spirit. For Aristotle, justice isn't just procedural, it's teleological. That means it's oriented toward a purpose, helping people live well, according to their nature as rational and social beings. So, a just society, in this view, isn't one that simply protects freedom, it's one that cultivates excellence and civic virtue. Sandel embraces this challenge. He argues that moral reasoning isn't just about applying abstract principles. It's about moral discernment, judgment, and engagement with the values that shape a community. This approach has powerful strengths. It reconnects politics to public deliberation. It encourages citizens to ask not just what are my rights, but what is worth valuing together. It treats justice as something active, rooted in the messy, contested terrain of moral and civic life. But it's not without risk. In pluralistic societies, people disagree deeply about what the good life entails. If the state takes a stand on moral ideals, whose vision prevails? How do we protect minority rights or prevent moral coercion? Sandel is aware of these concerns. He doesn't call for the imposition of a single moral code, but he does argue that we cannot escape moral questions, so we must learn to debate them well, with respect, humility, and seriousness. Justice, then, is not a destination. It's an ongoing conversation. And that may be Sandel's most important message. A just society depends not only on laws, but on citizens willing to reason together, to listen, and to ask what kind of world we want to build, together. What happens when abstract moral theories collide with the real world? In the final chapters of Justice, What's the Right Thing to Do?, Michael Sandel brings philosophy into the heart of today's most controversial issues, where principles are tested and easy answers dissolve. Take affirmative action. Should universities consider race or background in admissions? On one hand, meritocracy demands equal treatment and rewards for achievement. On the other, historical injustices and systemic barriers have left deep inequalities that merit alone cannot correct. Utilitarians might ask which policy produces the greatest good. Libertarians may insist on strict individual rights. Rawlsians would focus on fairness to the least advantaged. But no single theory provides a clear answer, which is precisely Sandel's point. These dilemmas force us to weigh competing values: fairness, equality, desert, and community. Or consider same-sex marriage. Is marriage a private right or a public institution tied to shared values? Should the state enforce a particular moral vision or accommodate diverse beliefs? Sandel shows how debates like this turn not just on legal definitions, but on deeper questions of identity, tradition, and the meaning of freedom. And then there's market morality, one of Sandel's signature themes. Should everything be for sale? From private prisons to blood donations, school admissions to organ markets, Sandel asks, are there moral limits to markets? Some goods, he argues, are degraded when bought and sold. When we treat education or civic duty as commodities, we risk hollowing out the values that give them meaning. In these cases, the real question isn't efficiency, it's what kind of society we want to be. In the end, Justice is not just a book about theories. It's an invitation to step into public life, not with slogans or certainty, but with questions. To see politics not as a battle of interests, but as a moral project, one that calls on us to reason together, even when we disagree. Michael Sandel reminds us that democracy depends not on technocrats or market forces, but on citizens, people willing to engage in honest debate about what's right and what's fair. No single theory resolves all dilemmas. And that's okay, because justice, Sandel says, is not a formula. It's a civic practice, a shared effort to reflect, to listen, to argue, and to build a world that honors both freedom and responsibility. In a time of polarization, mistrust, and moral fatigue, this message matters more than ever. Justice isn't just a philosophical ideal. It's a way of living and a way of thinking that helps us stay human together.